Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Self Publishing Tips and Tricks Show, a series designed to give you insight into the world of self publishing and marketing your books. I'm Shannon, writing under the pen name of SC Houston, and I'm here with my co hosts.
I'm Ben Pick.
And I'm Morgan Lee.
And we're here today with award-winning indie author and poet Christy Stratos. We're going to ask her questions about her self-publishing journey and how she markets her work. But before we jump into the interview, I want to ask you guys about points of interest that you may want to talk about or any news. And at this point, we are still at the end stage of our batching our interviews. So this episode won't come out until October, although we're recording now in June. We'll keep that in mind as we talk about what's going on.
Yeah, I am not planning anything that far in advance. I have my debut novel coming out August 6th, but by October, I have no idea where I'll be with that. So just watch my weekly episodes, Writing to Write, every Monday night at 7 p.m. on YouTube, sorry.
Yeah, same for me. I don't have anything planned out that far. I'm still working on getting books 2 and 3 of my trilogy ready for release. So that should be coming out sometime in these next couple of months. So look forward to that. And then, as usual, just stay tuned into my YouTube channel. And yeah, that's it.
So that sounds like a lot of great things happening, though. But Ben's book is coming out. You're going to hopefully have a couple books coming out soon at that same time or somewhere in that time period. And we're about to have the AuthorTube Writing Conference, which is the first of its kind coming in July. Hasn't happened yet as of recording this episode, but as of this airs, it will have gone live. You can still catch replays of all of the presentations at the AuthorTube Writing Conference by going to the website authortubewritingconference.com, where the links to the playlist will stay up there for the life of the writing conference. And we'll also have already announced our 2023 dates for anybody who's interested in presenting. Now let's talk about our guest author today. Christy Stratos is the author of the Victorian era historical suspense series, The Dark Victoriana Collection, and the Gaslamp dark fantasy novel Grimoire Society of Dark Acts. Also a poet and a short story writer, Christy has been published in anthologies, literary journals, and magazines, and she's given presentations for writing organizations and at writing conferences. And maybe we could get her for next year's conference at the AWC. She owns her own editing company, Proof Positive, where she works one-on-one with authors as well as with small presses as a freelance editor, and she has enjoyed working with a rising press as an acquisitions editor. Christy currently co-hosts the Once a Week on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, an interactive videocast Lurking for Legends with award-winning epic fantasy author Richard H. Stevens. She was the original host of the well-received podcast Writers Showcase, rated #1 videocast of 2019-2020 on the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. And welcome, Christy. Would you please take a moment to introduce yourself and talk about anything we missed?
Well, thank you so much for the great introduction. I really appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I enjoyed this show, so it's really cool to be on it. So, you did a great job introducing me. I don't think I have a whole lot else to tell you, except that I am a multi-genre author. I've published, in different places, as Shannon already mentioned, all different kinds of genres, but I really mainly stick to Victorian era historical suspense and historical fantasy. That's really what I would say I'm known for, if you could say that. So yeah, you did a great job. I have nothing to add.
Well, thank you. And I wasn't sure what Gaslamp meant. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, I need to go look this up. And I was like, okay, so it's basically, I guess, stories are set in the Victorian era, from what I understood the definitions I looked at. So I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So I'm glad I learned something new in just trying to get to know you.
That is really cool. Yeah. I was actually doing a little bit of a test on that on Twitter, asking people what they thought it meant and trying to figure out if anybody is very familiar with it. I mean, there is a whole audience for it, of course, but outside of that audience, do people know what it means? And so I was trying to see if they think it's steampunk or whether they think it's just Victorian fantasy, which is what it is. And, it's kind of mixed. So people, sort of readers have both impressions of it, but it leaves a lot open for what you're going to write, for sure.
Yeah. And that was one thing that I saw, one of the definitions that said it is not steampunk.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay. All right. So
Yeah.
before we jump into questions of self-publishing and marketing your books, could you tell us a little bit about your journey into self-publishing your very first book?
Yeah, my first book came out in 2015. That was Anatomy of a Darkened Heart. And that one was part of the Dark Victoriana collection. And, I'd been writing since I was a kid. It's the one thing I've always absolutely loved. So I majored in English literature in college. And it's funny because I had the strangest impression. I have no idea why. I wrote all the way up until college, and I had written a couple of novels. And I thought, well, if I don't get them published before I go into college, I'll never be able to publish them. That'll be the end for me. And I have no idea where I came up with that. That was so random. It was very strange. So I went into college thinking, well, that's it. My publishing journey is over now at the ripe age of 18. So, I found I couldn't stay away from it. I actually started out in a different major and switched over to English Lit because it's what I love. So no clue what I was going to do career-wise. Had no no interest in journalism or anything. So just went into it as something I loved. And I was stunned when I wrote some poetry and submitted it to a contest to win the contest and was like, really? Are you sure? So, I started to realize, other people might like my writing as well. I was too shy to share it with anybody but like my parents up to that point, really too shy. After college, I started writing a bit more, some different stuff and submitting it, and it was getting accepted. And again, I was like, that's interesting. So this is when I started really becoming interested in writing a new novel, not revamping the old stuff, but writing a new novel. And I discovered the self-publishing community. And that is really how I got into it. I know we're about to talk about another question. I don't want to trample on that one. So that's really how I got into it, really just kind of like a rolling thing. And I ended up writing a novel and loving it. I wasn't sure if I could at that point. I thought of, maybe I can only do short fiction. No, I was able to write the novel and it just kept rolling from there. So that's really how I did it.
It's so funny. I had a similar experience where I found a letter that I wrote to my brother about how when I was just starting off writing and I was going off to college, and I said, oh, I'll finish this book by the end of the semester and I'll be able to send it to you real quick. And I didn't send him the finished book until this past month. So we don't need to go how many years it's been, but it has been quite a few since then. So anyways, how did you make the decision to self-publish versus traditionally publishing that first book?
Yeah, like I mentioned before college, I had thought, I only knew about traditional publishing. And back then, that was when I first started college. It was like 2005. So at the time, there was vanity presses and, I hadn't really looked into self-publishing at all. I graduated and over time, I started to write and, like I said, get into the self-publishing community. And that's when I found people talking about self-publishing and that you could do it yourself. And you didn't need anybody else to be part of, well, not be part of the process, but to do it for you completely, publish the book. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. That's amazing, actually. Do you mean I don't have to submit to a publisher who's going to tell me to change everything? That's something I'm very interested in, so I had written that first novel and I was thinking most of the time these, historical novels are longer than what I have written. It was just above 50,000 words. It's not that long. You definitely have longer novels for historical fiction. And I was thinking I really didn't want to be told you need to insert more like violence is in right now. You need to insert more of that, whatever it might be at the moment that is really big in books or, media or whatever in general. I didn't want to be told I had to adjust the story to fit something, popular if it doesn't really work for the story. And the story had already been edited, been through a couple rounds of editing and everything. It was really at the best that it could be. And I was thinking like, I just don't want to be told add 20,000 words onto this, however you're going to do it. Haven't we all read books, even traditionally published, that you could cut a third out of it? It doesn't need to be there. So I said, okay, you know what? Self-publishing sounds really good to me. I don't have to like bend to anything. I don't have to make this book something it's not. I'd certainly heard some stories, not all, of course, but some stories of authors who had said, oh, the publishing agent changed, wanted me to change this so much that I didn't even want to write anymore. And I thought, I think I'm going to go the self-publishing route. So that's actually how I made the decision.
Did you have any misconceptions about self-publishing before you published your first book?
I did. I had this misconception at first that it was going to be easy. That was cute, right? That's adorable. I had been on the outside of the self-publishing author, community at first because I was coming in as a reader, of course. And I was just like, wow, this is an amazing community and I really like it. And then I started to look at it from the perspective as an author and joining in as an author. I started hearing what it actually entails. You're going to have to, hire your own cover artist if you're not good at making your own covers. And I was not. You're going to have to hire a formatter if you're not good at that. All that kind of stuff. Editing costs a lot of money, things like that. Quickly, I learned it's not that it's easy. Definitely not that it's easy. And you do have to hire people to help you or at least work with people that you trust. So this is not, when we say self-publishing, it's not a one-person show. Obviously, you need a lot more people. And when I first entered into it, I was like, wow, there are actually a lot more steps than I thought there were going to be. I thought it was simple, not thinking really about what does it take to get it from point A to point Z. Then once I got into it, I started to realize realize, you know what? I thought at first formatting is going to be easy because I'm really, really familiar with Word and stuff. And it was not. And I spent like 2 weeks the first time trying to format my story, just trying to understand, what advice out there is right, what's outdated, how am I going to make this look good? And then struggling with Amazon and I have a whole new respect, for formatters. So, and even communicating with a cover artist was a whole other situation than I thought it was going to be. The difference in understanding between us of what I was saying, you can totally interpret things so differently on either side of that, coin. So all of that was a huge misconception for me when we say self-publishing, and it sounds like, oh, you just publish it. Not really. There's a lot more to it. So, it's kind of a simplistic thing once we're all into it. Like, we all know what it is. But for anybody who's thinking about it, look into it. Like, really look into what it entails so you go in ready instead of panicking like I ended up doing.
I think you've hit it right there, that you think it's easy. I remember being in a couple of interviews and they asked me, well, now that you've done it, what did you think was your misconception? And I said, well, I thought that writing would be the hard part, but that was the easy part.
Yeah,
Writing
that's so
it.
true.
Yes. Doing the rest of it and getting it out there to the world takes a lot of time. And yes, meeting contacts and working with them and working with people. And it's really good if you can find good people to work with to help you
Absolutely.
on the journey. Well, you've recently published a novel on Kindle Vella and you started work on your next book. You also mentioned how you changed your publishing plan just to write the next Vella. And this was something you mentioned to me in an email. So I wanted to bring this up. So can you tell us about your work on Vella and why this changed your publishing plans?
Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, because Kindle Vella is not that out there yet. It's on Amazon, of course, and it is just a serialized form of writing. So you have episodes that you're writing, and it's similar to chapters. You don't want to quite think of it as chapters when you write it, but it's similar. So you're publishing by episode. It's not a brand new idea by a long shot, but it is for Amazon. That is what I don't remember exactly when it came out, but I had been looking for something that I could get in on the ground floor of. I kept like missing everything. I had no interest in TikTok. I cannot make videos every day. I just can't be doing it. It's intimidating to me. Things like that I just kept not doing and thinking, there's got to be something I can do, get on the ground floor. And I saw Vella come out and was sort of interested, watched it for, just a few months, and then thought, you know what, I'm going to jump on it. I'm going to see what happens. Why not? And so I did. And I thought it would be a really good way to also test writing historical fantasy. I had been really interested in writing some kind of fantasy. And since, most of my work is in the Victorian era, this is mostly historical suspense, I thought, all right, let me do historical fantasy. So it's not just like a totally different genre, epic fantasy separate from, Victorian era and everything. That way I can keep my audience and maybe grow a bigger audience. So it was kind of like a test of Vella and what my readers would read and what other people might be interested in. So I started doing it, and you're publishing at least once a week. You should be publishing in order to keep up your base, keep your base interested, your reader base. And it was tricky. I was having a great time writing it, but I had to make the time, and the time is the toughest thing for me. And the thing that happened, which was really, really cool, was I started saying, I need to be able to publish weekly. How am I going to manage this? And finally, for the first time in my life, I was able to just develop a way to write daily. It's funny because for years I had said there's no way I can do it. And then all of a sudden, when it kind of like came down to it, I could. So that was an interesting thing. It was sort of like the pressure was on and I managed it. And now I do have a solid everyday writing schedule. So that's something I didn't expect to happen to me from just using a particular publishing site, but it was doing well. And I was surprised, like when I got my first check, as we older people say, when I first saw that, I was like, I'm making more on this immediately than I have usually, made. Like when I launched my first book, for example, definitely making more than I usually make at a launch. And the numbers kept increasing. And I said, okay, I had a publishing plan to try publishing. It was, again, a totally different genre, nanopunk. I just have a lot of ideas and I like to write them. So, I mean, that was the path I was going to go down. I was going to try and publish really fast. And I said, why am I trying so hard to publish something like that? That's so far off from my brand. And I don't know how it's going to go when I've got something right here that's doing well. I need to pivot fast. And that's the beauty of being what we are. We're not a company that needs to have meetings upon meetings and approvals and stuff. We can say, this is what's working. I'm just going to do that. So that's what I did. My cover designer was at the end of designing one of my nanopunk covers. And I said, wait, hold on a second. This is going really well. We need to like turn, I'll make a deposit on what I already did, but we need to do the grimoire stuff. And he was like, let's go, so that's kind of how it happened. And as I said, that's kind of the beauty of being small. You're your own CEO in a way. I can just say, Villa's working. That's where the money is for me. I'm going in that direction.
So with writing consistently, like every day and putting out an episode every week, how are you handling the editing process part of that?
I have an editor, and she is, because it's like these are short episodes. Let's say the longest one is like 3,400 words. She can usually turn that around in a couple of days. So I just need to make sure that I'm, writing it within a certain amount of days, and that she has enough time. Now let me just clarify, that was the first book I wrote. That book is now complete on Kindle Vella. What I'm doing now for the second book is writing ahead. So I delayed the publication to July. I haven't decided on the date yet, but it's going to be in July, so that I can write a number of episodes. She doesn't have to rush, and I don't have to say, do you have it now? And we can just take it a little bit slower. And now I'm going to have 6 episodes already ready, publishing weekly. That's 6 weeks ahead of time. And then I can just write an episode per week. And if it takes me a week and a half, it's not going to be a big deal. So, I did learn from that for sure.
You own your own editing company, Proof Positive, where you work one-on-one with authors as well as small presses as a freelance editor. What have you learned, or what might have informed your own self-publishing process?
That's a great question. It's interesting because as an editor, you'd think everything that you apply to editing, you must apply to writing, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it's, as you guys probably know, it's a lot easier to see something in other people's work than it is to see in your own. So constantly working on other people's work and being able to take it apart neutrally, like from an objective standpoint, really helped me be able to do that for my own work, and be able to sort of distance myself from it. I used to need to take a big break. I would need, and this is advice from, really for the majority of people. You write a book, you take a break, you come back to it, and suddenly you see it differently. And it works really well for self-editing. And I've found that I have to do less of that. Not that I don't have to do it ever, but I have to do less of it because of all the time I've spent editing other people's work and, looking at it so objectively and kind of more noting what I'm doing to their work that could be applied to mine. First, it's just sort of, you're looking at it as this is other people's work, this is other people's work. But then you start to look at it as, no, I really could apply this to mine. Actually, I have these same problems, and it's kind of funny that we don't always see that in our own selves, but it has definitely helped me look more objectively at my work and distance myself from it. And now I'm at the point where when I write an episode for Kindle Vella, for example, I can back off of it fast. Like the next day, I can look at it from a fresh perspective and say, I don't need this sentence. I put that in because I did the research and I liked it. There was no reason to have that. It used to be I had to wait a month to be able to spot that. Now I'm doing it faster. And that has taken, I'll admit, it took years to get to that point. This is not an overnight thing at all. But at this point, it is easier. And still an editor will find stuff that I don't spot, of course, because it's my work. But it has helped with that for sure.
So, what are some issues writers should look for when first submitting their work to an editor, such as for a critique or a developmental edit?
So when you first submit your work to an editor, one of the things, and you might be surprised by this, one of the things I get, especially from new authors, is first drafts. I get a first draft, and I mean, I'll be totally straightforward. You're wasting your money if you're going to send an editor a first draft because it has so many errors. It's not just about proofreading and copy editing. Like, it's not just about the commas and the typos and stuff like that, but it's the consistency. It's characters that just disappear, things like that, that you would probably see if you did a really good read through of your novel before you sent it, a really good self-edit, as objective as it can be. It's difficult. I know that too from experience. But when people just send me a first draft, sometimes I send it back and say, really, I mean, you are wasting your money. You could get a lot more out of my work if you will just do a round of self-edits. And sometimes they'll do it. And sometimes they say they don't care. And they just want me to do it anyway, which is difficult. Honestly, there's no way an editor can catch everything when so much is off, right? So if you're focusing on the character consistency is way off, and then the plot is way off, and then the pace, there are like plot holes, how can you fix the pacing when all of that is so off? You can't really, because you don't know how the fixed version is going to read. So I can say to you, the pacing is good, but everything else is off. But then when you fix it, the pacing might be off, right? This is a common thing that I see, especially with new authors. Definitely don't do that. Go through your own work. Even if you're sick of it, just do it. And if you're sick of it, wait, I know we all get impatient, but wait and then go through it again before you send it. And trust me, it will be so much more worth your money. You're going to spot things you had no idea were there, and you're going to say, thank goodness I fixed that. Now we can focus on really important stuff. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, so to go back to what you were saying, that working as an editor has helped inform your own process, and I can definitely attest to that because I was a writing coach for many years and did a whole lot of editing for a lot of people. So I found things that I thought, well, I didn't like, way certain sentences were constructed or how things were put together. I was like, okay, I'm going to avoid that when I do my writing. So I can definitely see how that worked. But like you said, having the editor is still nice because you miss stuff in your own work every time.
Absolutely.
So why might a writer want a full critique of their manuscript before beginning editing with a developmental edit?
Usually when you want to critique, it's because you're uncertain the manuscript in one way or another. You're looking at it and you're saying, I'm not really sure if this plot, even works. I've definitely received that kind of a thing. Not sure if this is any good. I can't tell anymore. I've worked on it too much. Can you give me a general, just a critique? Tell me what I need to fix overall before we get into the nitty gritty. And that can be absolutely worth it. There are people who go straight down the line of having, let's say, a critique and then a developmental edit and then a copy edit. There are people who come to me and are really they're so professional and so well versed in writing and editing themselves that all they need is a copy edit and they don't need anything else. It's going to be different for every single person. But if you're going through your manuscript and you have doubts as to its validity or, anything even close to that, that's when you're looking for a critique. You can get an overarching opinion. This is what I'm seeing. These are the major problems. These are some of the smaller details that you're going to want to look at as you go through and edit. And it's typically what you're going to receive is a report. So, you might get like track changes in there, comments, whatever, but you're definitely going to get a report, at least from my company, but I'm pretty sure everyone does that. And it's going to give you quite a lot of detail about, some things that were really great and that are important to the genre, characters, anything like that. And then you're also going to receive the things that really need an overhaul. One of the biggest things I often find is that chapters are out of order. It flows for the writer, but from an outside perspective, the time between these chapters is weird, right? And you'll have like one chapter that's a month ago and then a chapter that's a week ago and then a chapter that actually goes back, but there isn't a purpose. Like there's no reason we skipped. And so the writer might think, oh yeah, there was a reason. But when somebody objectively looks at it, they're like, you'd really have to have a strong reason to have to go back and forth like that if you're not going to do it with the whole manuscript. This isn't just a flashback, right? We're actually supposed to be going along in time naturally, but it's jumped back. So it can be hard for an author to spot that kind of a thing, but very much easier for someone totally disconnected. So like that's the kind of thing you're going to find in a critique.
As we mentioned in your bio, you have worked as an acquisitions editor. Could you explain to us what that means to you and what exactly you do for that role?
Yeah, sure. So as an acquisitions editor for a small press, basically you're going to be, as an author, sending me your manuscript directly, actually. And I'll be reading it and figuring out if I want to ask for the whole manuscript. Usually you're going to be sending me, there's usually something on the website. Send the first 4 or 5 chapters, something along those lines. And I'll be reading it and seeing if it's something that I think could work for the small press. And then I'll ask for a full manuscript. You can send me the full manuscript. I might ask for more, anything along the lines of, do you have a synopsis or, something like that for the entire series? Anything along those lines could be asked for. So then I'm going to read the whole manuscript and I'm not going to be necessarily looking at nitty gritty stuff. I'm looking to see whether it matches the small press's purpose and whether what we want to see in an author is there. It could be that, you're submitting something that's romance for a small press that handles romance, but maybe it's not quite, the type of subgenre, that we handle, or it just doesn't really fit in terms of the writing style in a way. We're going for fast pace and it's really, really slow type of thing. It may not be that it's bad if you're rejected. This is a lot of authors, especially beginning authors, might think I got rejected. That means my manuscript is no good. It's not that it's no good. It's just that it didn't work for this particular company. And sometimes with acquisitions editors, especially in small presses, they'll write back and tell you what it is that, was off for them. So, I've definitely seen even for literary agents, they'll send something back and say, there's just not enough detail. Like there's not enough for the reader to grab hold of in here. Try again, like when you flesh it out or something. It can be anything along those lines. But yeah, so basically, yes, you're going to send in the manuscript. I'm going to read it, a certain percentage of the manuscript. I read it. I tell you if I want the full manuscript, and then I'm going to tell you whether or not this is going to work for the company. And then you may or may not receive an offer. So that's kind of like the basics of how it's working. And by the way, within the company, sometimes editors do pass around a manuscript where they say, it's not for me, but is it for one of you? So that can happen as well.
Are you comfortable discussing any publishing missteps or things you would have liked to have done differently?
Yeah, I have a big one, and I advise everyone against what I'm about to say. So when I first start, okay, so one thing you have to know about my personality is that I get super excited about something, and then I just like bowl everything over and just go for it. You know what I mean? And I don't take the time to really stop and think about it always. Sometimes I get just so excited, particularly with writing. And I used to make this mistake a lot. In the very beginning, it would be like, with Anatomy of a Darkened Heart, I said, here's my publication date. I just decided on a publication date. I did not put any thought into it. So you can see where this is going already. That one didn't work out too badly. I had magically, by beginner's luck, I was able to make that publication date. Then I set listen to this, you guys are going to crack up. Publication dates for like 5 other books after that. Not even outlined, I'm pretty sure this will make a lot of sense. This works for me. I was thinking at first I would have a few novelettes. I thought the second book would be the second through the 4th book, I believe, would be in novelettes. And then I would have a final novel, and that would be the series. I am a pantser. I do not plot. I never know where something is going. So especially if you are a pantser, this is a big mistake. Danger signal, red flag, stop now. Do not move ahead. As soon as you get that excited, like, I'm sure I can do this thing, stop. Okay. So this is what I did. And I said I was going to publish this particular book, Lock and Key, which I later changed the title to Brotherhood of Secrets. I said I was going to publish that in a particular month. I discovered while I was writing that it was absolutely not going to be a novelette. It was a full-length novel. There was no way this thing was going to be a novelette. It just wasn't working. And I saw where it was going, and it was utterly different than what I thought, which is the problem with pantsing when you're trying to plan ahead. So I had to keep pushing back the date over and over again, 2-3 times, something like that. And that is just never good, because you can always have people who lose interest. They think, she's just going to keep pushing it back. Forget it. She doesn't know what she's doing. I'm on to somebody else. I'm not paying attention anymore. People can get annoyed, like genuinely annoyed with this kind of thing. So I did learn the hard way never to do that ever again. And I haven't. And the 3rd book in the Dark Victoriana collection has actually taken me years to write. So it's a good thing that I did not plan another release date for that, because I would have been putting it off for how many times now? Millions by now, right? Years? It would have been a disaster. So this is my big flub. And I always advise people, be careful when you're planning your publication date. I see authors all the time plan it way too far in advance without knowing, or without planning like gaps in between. If your editor gets sick, if your cover artist suddenly has to drop out, if someone quits their job and just isn't there anymore. So you may want to wait until a certain time in the process nobody likes to hear that, but like a certain point in the process, you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to publish. If you're super experienced, you may not have to do that. You probably know how it flows for you. But for especially beginner writers publishing your 1st or 2nd book, start thinking about what could go wrong here. And do I have enough like space in there for mistakes and for people to get sick and just not be there? So that's my big piece of advice. And it was bad. It was not fun.
And I think to add to that, those who are experienced, they know how fast they can write and how to
Yeah.
get done. They probably already also have an established team that they can rely on, versus those of us who are just starting out and like, okay, am I gonna be able to keep this editor for my next round? Yeah, it's probably easier for them to keep hold of it. I wish we would have thought of this question to ask you. So I'd like to ask you, can you tell us about the small press you work for and what kind of works they're looking for, just in case of our listeners are interested in submitting to you?
Sure. Yeah. I no longer work there, and it's only because I don't have the time. I loved working there. It's a brilliant small press. They're called City Owl Press, and they're a romance press. So they do all different kinds of subgenres of romance. They're fabulous. They act like a traditional publisher. That's really their model. The people there are extremely kind. They're super helpful, and they really know what they're doing with romance. I wish I had the time, and I hope that at some point I will have the time to go back, because it was just such a pleasure working there. You can go to their website. Just look up Study Owl Press. There's only one. And check out on their submissions page who is accepting. I think right now there's only one person who is accepting. They have an imprint as well called Mystic Owl. And I believe that's more like paranormal type stuff. But check it out to make sure that I got that right. Yeah, so always check the submissions page, see who's accepting, see what they're accepting, and go for it with them because, like I said, they're really the real deal. It can be tough to find small presses that really treat authors right. And if you have to pay for a small press, just note that that's vanity. It's a vanity press. You know, like it's a tough one to have to say because there are a lot of small presses that people like that you have to pay for, but it's no longer genuinely you being published by somebody else in the same way if you are paying for the editing and the cover and everything else, right? So that's the definition of vanity press. This place is the real deal. They're really, really good. As I said, I know they accept a lot of subgenres and there's no way I'm going to remember them all, but it's everything from historical to paranormal. And I want to say even space type things. It's just absolutely, it's a lot of great stuff. So definitely check them out. I highly recommend them if you write romance.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I totally understand that. You know, I knew that as working as a writing coach and I was also teaching college English and literature, I was helping everybody else be a better writer. I didn't have time to write myself. So I had to pull back from that. There's still part of me is like, well, maybe I could just still do some editing or something. And I've thought it's gone through my head. I don't know how many times in a month they'll do it. Every month it'll go through. Maybe I can do some editing so I can, you know, because it's hard getting started as an author and making money right away.
Oh yeah.
But I think, well, if I edit, I'm not going to have time to write. So.
This is the tricky balance, isn't it? Yeah. We all want to like help each other too. And it can be tough to balance that for sure.
Well, if you could only pass on one tip or trick to aspiring self-published writers, what would that be?
There are like so many that I love to pass on to everyone. But one thing I would say is I hear a lot of authors say things along the lines of, I'm not good at marketing. And this is the excuse that I'm not going to market. And, you know, it's not my fault, right? So I'm not good at marketing either. I'm pretty bad. I try my best, but I'm not that great. But, you know, for a while, I let that be sort of an excuse for myself. And then I started to realize I'm only hurting me. You know, all that's happening is I'm just not doing it. And it's not like people are flocking to me saying, that's okay, we'll buy your book. Like, that's not going to happen. So I started to realize it's up to me to get better at this stuff and stop just saying, I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it. It can be very tiny steps. This doesn't just have to be marketing. What I'm saying is if you catch yourself saying, I'm just not good at this and cannot do it. I mean, if it's something you can pay other people for and you're willing to, fine, that's great. But if it's not, and it's holding you back from the success you could be having, this is when to have like a serious sit down with yourself and say, what is it I'm not good at in marketing? Why am I not good at it? And what is really missing from the information I have? How can I improve that? And when we look at marketing, we see like a giant chunk of something, but marketing can be this. It can just be, my Instagram isn't doing too well. I wonder why. Let me look at it. What are people not liking? Hey, they really liked when I published these beautiful pictures, but they don't like when I just publish my book over and over and over again. Okay, that kind of gives me an insight. That's a chunk. You just did something there. You figured out what your audience likes and what they don't like. The tiny steps is how you start to become not necessarily an expert, but you start to gradually increase your knowledge in whatever it is that you're saying to yourself, I can't. So like my biggest piece of advice would definitely be whatever you're saying, I absolutely can't, that's holding you back. Start taking tiny chunks and start disassembling that belief because we actually all can do all this stuff. It just looks really complicated from the outside. We can do it. We can absolutely do it. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice.
You actually transitioned perfectly from publishing to marketing, which is associated with my next question. What marketing do you do for your already published novels and short stories?
And as I said, so marketing isn't my strongest point, but I have been learning more and more. And one of the things I do is I attend any of those free like webinar types of things, you know, where I know it's like 5 days worth of, 5-hour sessions and stuff. And it's tough to fit in. But these are the kinds of things I do when like I'm washing the dishes or something, you know, and I'm just listening and trying to learn. I like to think over time I'm improving. So I'm probably not going to say anything brand new here. Basically, a lot of what I do is I'm looking around to see what other people are doing, what's working for them. I'm trying it on my page, and it's interesting because I find a lot of what works for other people doesn't work at all for me. So I had somebody say to me with Kindle Vella, just you have to put your book cover up over and over and over. Just do that over and over, and you'll start getting reads. And it was the exact opposite. It was just the total opposite. My Instagram page got abandoned. Nobody was looking at it. Nobody was liking anything. So what I typically do now, and it has taken taken me quite some time to figure this out. People seem to like to see pretty pictures that are original things that I own of the Victorian era. This is something it took me quite some time to figure out because I sort of was afraid of just drawing in people who like history. So apparently, there is a pretty big crossover between those who like just, things that take place in the Victorian era and who are actually like big history lovers. They do come together in the middle, and I was kind of afraid they wouldn't, but they do. Through a lot of experimentation, I figured out that doing my own flat lays with all the stuff I, collect and acquire around the Victorian era is what these people want to see. It sounds so obvious now that you might be sitting there saying like, duh, why didn't you think of that before? It's the Victorian era, you write in the Victorian era, why wouldn't you do that? But what I was doing before was looking at, as I said, other people and using what they were doing. It's a good jumping off point, but it didn't really work for my audience. So that's what I'm doing now that's working a lot better. And it transitions so much better into people buying my books and being interested, even just asking about them. Sometimes I'll get a message, do you like write anything about this? Even though it says on my bio that I'm an author, I'm still getting a message because all they saw was my post and they didn't click my bio. And they're saying, do you write stuff about this? Or like, what is it you like about this? They'll start asking questions. So one of the things that I do now that's working for me is publishing things like what I just said and interacting with people who are interested in the period. It doesn't even have to be my book. It can just be the period. I'm establishing myself as more of an expert in the field. I hate saying that because there's definitely people out there that know more than I do, but an expert in the field. I know what I'm talking about. And look at all this cool stuff. It's really working. When I started my my Facebook group, I waited and waited and waited to start my Facebook group. I didn't know what to put in there. I was like, this is what other people do. I'm not seeing many reactions to their stuff. Something isn't working there. Finally, I was like, let me try sharing my research. And this is what worked. This is what worked. People really liked it on my Patreon too. So that's what I'm doing. That's the marketing that's working. It's not even marketing my book. It's just marketing what I know.
So in addition to that, is there any other types of marketing that you've done that you would never want to do again, besides like doing things that don't work for you, like by looking at other people?
Yeah, for me, and as I always say, like it's different for every single person. For me, I was trying really hard to market on YouTube. I was trying really hard to build my channel. The problem is that I don't have that much time to go and comment on other people's channels and watch their full videos and everything. And so obviously that's what any form of social media is. It's engagement. And that's how the algorithms all work. So I had put a lot of time into my YouTube channel. And for me, I couldn't post every day. I know that you need to post often for it to work out on YouTube. I had been posting once a week thinking that that would probably do it. And it just never worked for me. It didn't matter if I did live streams sharing like updates about my book. It didn't matter, if it was more pre-recorded type of stuff, talking about other books, anything like that. It just wasn't working. And again, I did find that when I was talking about my research, that seemed to do the best. But again, it takes time to gather that. It really does. And to then sit down and make a video as well was so time consuming. And I was getting nothing back on YouTube. I couldn't trace any sales back to it. Of course, they're not paying me. They ran off with the $30 I did make. So, for me personally, it was too much of an investment of time and it just did not reflect in my sales. So for me, I wouldn't put the time into it, but you have to look at it for yourself.
So you mentioned earlier about your marketing and how you found what worked for you. And I think that is a perfect thing to note that we've talked about here on the show. And I have actually, that was my one big collab I've had on my channel, author branding. How do you author brand, yourself and reach readers versus other writers? And I think that what you're doing is really great, that you're reaching your readers by establishing your brand through your Victorian era. So I just wanted to comment that I thought it was really great that you've hit that on that. And I'm hoping I can do that at some point for myself, and I haven't hit it yet. But
It's hard. Again, another thing that took me years to figure out.
So Amazon doesn't seem to do any marketing for Kinda Vella from what we've been able to see. So how do you market your Vella stories, or what tips could you pass on to those who might want to try Vella out?
Yeah, Amazon really has a lot of improvement to do on Vella. It's in the baby stages. So, right now this is still the ground floor, even though we're 1 or 2 years into it. Not really, I can't remember when they started exactly, but it's still the ground floor. They aren't investing a whole lot. I'm not sure if it's that they're trying to figure out whether it's worth it or what the deal is exactly. But you're right, they're really not advertising it. So it is up to us as the authors to spread the word about our work. And it's a little bit tricky. One of the best things things you can do is join any kind of group, like Facebook group for Kindle Vella in particular. And those exist. There are Kindle Vella readers and writers groups, both separate and combined. And making sure that you publish your work on those is critical. It's really, really, really crucial. Everything I was doing before that was kind of okay. It was working relatively well. I would post as I normally do on social media and mention the book instead of like putting it in people's faces too much, which I found my audience did not like at all. And I would also talk about just what's coming up in the next episode. That's always a good thing. That worked particularly well on Twitter more than Instagram. So I was tracking like, where is this going down well and where is it not really working? For me on Twitter, that seemed to draw in people who were interested in Vella. I'm not sure why. Maybe because Twitter is so fast paced and reading serialized fiction is fast paced. I couldn't say for sure, but that's like a quick analysis. It is a matter of pushing it yourself and joining those groups. That is really the thing that definitely works. As I said, before I joined those groups, I was doing okay and it was still worth my time. But once I joined those groups, started sharing my work, that was what did it. That's where the audience is. That's where people are looking to read Vella. If you find some other place that has serialized, you can post something serialized in particular, that seems to maybe be the key, making sure that the people there are interested in serialized works and willing to kind of jump into this like token system that Vella has, because it's a little bit different. And I think a lot of people might see that they have to do something differently when they pay for a book and say, oh, it's too much. I don't know what that means. Going into some place where people are interested in serialized fiction, I think that is very helpful.
You're currently part of the interactive video cast Lurking for Legends, and I've also been a host in the past on Writer Showcase. Do you see these ventures as adding value to your author platform, or are they strictly more towards your brand?
Yeah, I do think that they're more towards my brand. I can say with like 99% certainty, it's not about the sales when I do these things. It's about the brand, and it is also about making connections. One of the things that's easy to forget when you're marketing, it's not always about how many books did I sell based on this effort. It can be, do people know my name and what do they associate it with? Do they turn to me to ask me a question even? Like, are you trying to become an expert indie author where people turn to you and say, how do I do this? Are you trying to establish yourself as someone who's an expert in the Victorian era? What are you trying to accomplish when you do this kind of a thing, when you do like a podcast or video cast, even a blog? What are you trying to accomplish? And that should really guide what you're posting. So, when I was appearing on podcasts and I really enjoyed it. One of my author friends kind of handed down to me his video casts because he just didn't have the time anymore. And I took it over and I really, really liked it. And I was finding, at first I was frustrated and I said, like, nobody's really buying my book based on this. I mentioned it in the beginning and I mentioned it at the end. Why is nobody buying it? Is this the wrong venue? Like, what is it? And I started to realize people, of course, are not attending so they can buy my book. That's not the purpose of a video cast or a podcast, is it? It's really so they can hear from the other author that you're interviewing. They're coming for the conversation and the information. So no, I'm not going to sell my book on this. That's not what this is about. Maybe from something like this where I'm, more the focus, what we're doing right here, but not when I'm the host necessarily. I started to realize this is different. Okay, people are starting to say, can I be on your podcast? They're seeing me as a podcast host. This is becoming part of what I am to them. Great. That's fantastic. I'm getting to know more authors and I'm making connections, and sometimes I'm connecting them, and it's fun. I'm really enjoying it. And during that time, like when we're sitting right here, I can just focus on all of you and I can focus on answering your questions and having a nice conversation. Whereas the rest of the day, it's very multitasking. And even while I'm writing, it's like I have to research and now I have to fix this word and now I have to go over here and check this and that and the other, and you're jumping around. And I found that that was also just something that meant a lot to me personally. So it became both brand and personal satisfaction, something that felt really, really good to do. And then I moved into Writer Showcase, as you said, really enjoyed that, and moved into Lurking for Legends. And that's what I'm doing now. We have 3 co-hosts just like you do. And I really enjoy it more that way than I actually did on my own, because we all have different ideas and different opinions on what's important and what we want to ask and stuff. And so again, this is establishing me as, a video cast host, somebody who, you can turn to for more exposure. You can maybe ask a little bit about publishing. And that's something I wanted also. I wanted to be able to help other authors, yes, as an editor, but also just as somebody who's been around the block and made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot of things. So there's actually a lot to do my doing video casts more than just, I hope you buy my book, and I'm sure it is for all of you as well.
I would say it was definitely from a selfish perspective that we came up with the show, that we wanted to know what's working for other authors. And
Sure.
then instead of just asking someone one on one, and we keep the answer to ourselves, and this way we get to share what we learn with everybody else as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that feels really good, and you're contributing back to a community that probably helped you get your start. So it's just really nice and helpful. And again, this is going to become at least a small part of each of your brands, which is, there's something to be said for that. Yeah. Yeah, Ben.
All right, so you have a really beautiful and interactive website. So, can you tell us a little bit about how it was designed? Did you do it yourself or did you hire someone to design your website?
First, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
I did not do that myself. This is one of those points where I would say I am not an expert. And at some point I had to admit that. And it can be tough for me to admit that kind of thing, honestly, because I like to be able to do things myself. I don't like to have to depend on others, but that's not a team spirit. That's just trying to be a mountain, right? And that's not going to help for self-publishing. So at first I had designed my own website and it was okay. It wasn't bad for the time. I had looked around and I did what I was seeing elsewhere. It was not really converting too much traffic to buying. It was all right. But I started to realize, after a while, I was looking around, I was like, my website looks really old. It's definitely an old style. I don't like it anymore. I don't think it even really represents me. And it's definitely no longer converting sales at all. So I started looking around and I found a fantastic designer. I hope you guys don't mind, but I'm just going to say it's Con Lavery. His business is called Reveal Design. And he's so fantastic. I did try to work with a couple designers before, and it was really not what I had hoped for. I got really upset with one of them where I knew more about it than he did. So watch out. There are definitely people who don't know what they're talking about, but they just have a nice website and it looks like they know what they're talking about. Don't be afraid ever. And this is unsolicited advice. Don't be afraid ever to say, this no good. You're not hearing what I'm saying, or that's not quite it. I think we should break off here. Like this is what I had to do with him. I had to demand my money back because it was just like, literally, I'm telling you, I actually knew more. So I found Khan and he was doing these beautiful websites and I talked to him about it. And, we walked through what I was looking for and it was so much better. It was a very open process. One of the things to look for, if you can, in a website designer is somebody who's willing to share with you how to update your site. They're not money grabbing where they're like, you're going to have to pay me hundreds to update something small. No. That's not good. That was my first designer. And she said, don't touch anything. You'll break it. And I was like, oh my God, like I can't touch anything. Ah. And I was so scared because I didn't know. But, Khan was like, that's not true. That's not how it works. And here's how to actually, do this kind of stuff. Let me walk you through it. And I was like, okay, so this is a trustworthy person. There are designers out there who will do that for you. And maybe you do have to pay them an hourly fee for like a coaching session almost, so that you can do things for yourself in the future if you don't want to have to say like, I need this updated. How much is it going to cost? Like whatever. He really did everything there for me. He gave me a number of themes to look at. I looked at them. I said, I still wanted it to be unique to me. I didn't want it to look like any, just a whole bunch of other sites necessarily. Of course, it's going to have some things about it that will be. I wanted it to be a little bit different. So we found it kind of like, I picked it. He said, yes, this is doable. I can adjust it in this way, the other way, blah, blah, blah. And we went ahead with it. I had so many questions and he answered all of them, which was another thing I wasn't used to. It was fantastic. And I ended up with this super, like you said, an interactive website that is really much easier to navigate, much simpler than my old one. And I actually know how to edit it. So I can actually work with it myself. And anything that I don't understand is just beyond me. And I don't have the time to spend grasping, what do I do here? What does this even mean? I can turn to him and just say, can you just do this for me? I don't know what it is. Can you just please help me with this? And he'll just do it. He's very fast too. So that's why I sing his praises, because I had such a bad experience in the past.
So, oh my God, I am so very thankful that you said his name on this recorded podcast so I can go back and look it up, because my website still only has my first book on it. And I now have 3 books out because I'm afraid I'm going to break something. And
Yes, yes.
And I did hire another person to help me update it for the second book, and she was like messing it all up. And I said, stop. And I asked for my money back, and she gave it to me. So my
Good.
website is still where it's at from my first book. And so I think I'm going to look into your guy and see if I can get a better website going for me.
Good, good. I hope it works out for you. He's fantastic.
So you also sell books directly from your site, which I think is phenomenal. I'm really looking into that for my future of my books. And it's something many well-established indie authors talk about. I've heard a lot of it on podcasts. So how did you make the decision to sell direct? And can you tell us about the process of setting it up and like what tools do you use?
Sure. Yeah. I've always sold direct to some degree. So even when I did my own website, I did figure out how to have like a PayPal set up there so that I could sell directly to authors and keep more of the money for myself as opposed to Amazon. And I also was interested in delivering a unique experience. I really wanted to send my books and have people wowed by them. And so I came up with a whole thing where I actually wrap the books in a wrapping paper that matches the theme of the book. So the first book is wrapped in a black and white damask wallpaper, which does appear in the book, which I thought was just like so much fun. I couldn't resist it. And like black ribbon. And, for the second book, I do some hand stamping on the paper and there's a little charm that comes with it. I wanted it to be an experience that you can't get on Amazon. So that was part of my purpose in selling direct. And then when Con redesigned my website, I had said like, how can I go about doing this? I'd like to maintain selling direct, but I don't want to do it the way I was. I think it's confusing and a little convoluted. And so he recommended WooCommerce, which is a super, super common app to use. It works really well with WordPress sites in case you use WordPress. So he recommended that and he did the setup for me. I could not have done it on my own. I'm sure that there are people who can. I don't know that it's that complicated, but I was afraid of making some kind of silly mistake and having things not connected right. So I asked him to do it and he did. And then it was just a matter of going through and figuring out like the details of what needed to be there and what didn't need to be there. There's like a lot of extra stuff in the background of these kinds of apps that you can turn on and off or choose whether you want to have them working. I wish I could think of an example off the top of my head, but it's just not coming to me right now. But that part I did myself, but the rest really, Con set it up. It was fast and easy, and it's very easy for the customer. So the one thing I'll recommend is go through the process yourself after it's set up. Make sure it's not buggy. Something wasn't connected right, and I didn't understand what, but I just sent it over to Con. He figured it out. It was fixed quickly. I didn't have to deal with it, but I could have lost sales if I hadn't done that. So just make sure you test things for yourself. Make sure that they're running properly. And and that's really all there was to it. People do order from there. Like I said, Vella is doing the best for me, but they do order directly from there. And the page is so clean and nice, and it looks more like something professional that you would buy from, something trustworthy, because it's an app that knows what it's doing with selling direct to customers.
Cool. That's so wonderful. How do you drive traffic to your website or to a specific page within your website, such as your own purchasing service?
Sure. Yeah. I actually do it in a semi-indirect way. I found that I was paying attention to, my analytics, and I found that people were really coming to my site for a select few things. I had been doing interviews with authors. It was not getting me traction. I had tried a couple of other things too, kind of broad stroke things. They weren't working. So finally, I found that doing book reviews on my site was getting me views. Very interesting. Not what I would have expected for an author's site, but it's working. And if it's working, I'm not going to not do it. So I started realizing, okay, this is something I need to keep up consistently, or as consistently as I can. I'm a slow pleasure reader. I read all day. That's my job. So by the time I get at night, I can only read so fast. But putting up those book reviews really drew people in. Also, which will not surprise you now, putting up interesting things having to do with the Victorian times. So I had done a lot of research. I was looking through Victorian newspapers, and I was like, this is just such interesting stuff. I've got to share this somewhere. And I started sharing it both on Instagram. Actually, it was on social media in general and on my website. And I was surprised to see people were coming to my website for these things. Really, really surprised, because it's not like the topics were very trendy at all. So, it didn't necessarily have key terms that you'd think of people looking up all the time, but it was drawing them in. And another thing can be the Lurking for Legends videocasts, but how I draw them to buy my book is basically I have like the book review, which I put on Goodreads, and then I take their HTML and I put it on my blog to make it just really easy for me. At the bottom, I say something like, let's say I read a suspense book. I try to read within what I research or what I write mostly. And that way, when I leave a review on my site, it suits my brand. So if I leave a suspense book review, I write suspense. Are you interested in more suspense? Read my books. Click down below and go to this page or that page. And I have seen that I get specifically, interestingly, they're on my website. My books are right there, right over there, but they buy from Amazon for some reason. So that's fine. I still make the money. It doesn't matter. It might just be that they don't know me yet and they want to buy from a trusted site or something like that. So that's how I actually do it. And it's been working really well. Sometimes I'll put a subscribe to my newsletter at the bottom. It really doesn't work as well as putting my books at the bottom. That's just me. It could be that it works better for you to put a newsletter at the bottom, but I've found that putting my books works pretty well. So that's really how I drive traffic, and people start clicking around from there to different pages, of course. So I draw them in with the blog. I don't even have a follow my blog at the moment. I just draw them in with the topics. It's not what I would have ever expected, but it works.
So if you could only pass on one marketing tip or trick to newly self-published authors, what would it be?
I guess it would be to really experiment and be unafraid to pivot. So I mentioned pivoting before, and I just want to repeat that one of the best parts of self-publishing, we call it indie publishing, stands for independent. We're independent and we can do, what we need to do at any given moment. And, really taking advantage of that is important. It can be just important to stick with something to make sure that it works or doesn't work. If you build a YouTube channel, don't quit next week because you didn't get the views. Obviously, you need to stick with that. But if you see something is working, you can pivot in that direction. If you are, suddenly, if you're posting on your Instagram or somewhere else, it happens to me mostly with Instagram. That's why I keep mentioning it. If you post, you start posting something in particular to your Instagram and your, engagement tanks and it stays tanked, pivot fast. You know what I mean? You don't want to fall totally out of the algorithm. So like these are the kinds of things where we can just change on, just right like that in a second. We can change. That's our greatest strength, really, to be able to just say, forget it. This ad on Amazon isn't working. Stop. That's the end of that. I'm just not going to spend any more money, as opposed to a company where you've got to get the votes and you got to have the meetings and all this kind of stuff. I came to appreciate this a lot because I worked for a corporation, and as you can imagine, everything we did took forever. So it's like, being able to just change like that and switch up the marketing when you need to. Brilliant. Awesome. I need to change the cover. Change it right now. No problem.
Definitely the joy of being an independent author, that you can
Mm.
change. And even when it comes to like mistakes and you realize, oh, well, I misspelled that word, you can easily just go in there and change it. Instead of
Yes, you don't have to wait for anybody else
right, right.
to do that. Exactly.
Or not have it done, because I've heard on a few podcasts of traditionally published authors who they'll find a mistake in the book and they'll tell their publisher and they're like, we're not going to change it because it's whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'd be freaking out if that was my book.
Yeah. I'd be in pain, like physical pain.
Yes. All right, so we're going to transition from your marketing to your writing life and your works. So how do you balance your time between writing, your video cast, and your business as an editor?
This is never easy, and I don't have any kind of super easy answer. One of the things the corporate world did to me was absolutely ruin my focus. So multitasking is both my strength and the bane of my existence. It's something that my brain has a tough time switching out of, which can be hard, but it is what it is. So, I mean, what I do is I try to set aside, for example, like, now that with Vella, it has changed the way I put aside time for writing. Before, I was like, there's no way, I don't have the time. Now I've got myself waking up early every day to write. And believe me, I am aware if you work one of those jobs where you wake up at 5 a.m., that's not doable. I get it. But it's great if you can figure out where you can fit in that time. Leaving it to chance, sometimes you have to. It depends on your job and your life. But if you can figure something out where you can depend on that time, that's obviously the easiest way to manage your time. So, for me, like I said, I get up an hour early every day and I write, and that's all I do. I don't check my email. I don't look at social media. I get involved in nothing until I write. I used to think I was a night writer, and I thought I couldn't write in the morning until I started saying, that's the only time I have. And I'm kind of like unhindered by the rest of the day. There's no stress that has touched me yet. There's no uncertainty or confusion or anything like that about what's going on here, or, who said what on this social media. And oh my God, that press is going under, none of this kind of stuff that distracts us. I just go in and I start writing. I turn on my music and that's it. And it really works for me. So that is how I separate out my writing time. If I get no other time, that's okay. I've already had it. So then, the majority of the rest of my day is spent editing, and that's my job. So that's how I make sure it gets done. I spend most of the day doing it. And then the video cast, luckily, in the past, it used to be that I was in charge of everything. So the editing is the majority of my day. And then I go into the video cast. And the video cast, as I said, now we have 3 co-hosts for Lurking for Legends. So that leaves me not having to know everything myself. It used to be me as the only co-host. And that was okay, but it's a lot of pressure on the host. And I used to have to do everything. I used to come up with the graphics and do all the marketing and put up an event and do everything. It was a lot of work. And I started to question, is it worth the time? Can I spend this time anymore? I'm not really sure how to manage that when I've got so much else going on. It was cutting hugely into my writing time. I had almost none left. So when, it was actually Richard Stevens, his podcast, his idea. So he had approached me and asked if I would be a co-host. And I had said, I don't think I can do that because it takes too much time. And he said, no, I actually have an amazing person who's going to be doing all the stuff in the background. Yes. Now I'm in. Okay. That's how I'm able to manage the time now. That being said, like I said, I was on the verge of quitting because it was too much for my schedule. So sometimes we have to make these hard decisions. Sometimes there isn't a way to manage your time better. I don't want to burn out, so if I don't want to burn out, I have to take care of myself, and I have to recognize when something is too much. So I'm very happy that there was a solution, and I only have to spend a certain amount of time now on the video casts, getting to know the guests and coming up with questions. And it's a pleasure now instead of pressure. All that is to say that if you can structure your time like this is what I'm doing. That's perfect. It's ideal. If you can stop with the multitasking and do the Pomodoro method or something and set your alarm and say, I'm going to write for an hour. Okay, that hour is up. I'm moving on to editing. I'm going to edit for an hour. Okay, that time is up. Now I'm moving on. That's great because your brain starts to say, okay, we can do this. This is the time for this. This is the time for that. That's ideal. When you discover something that isn't working, it's okay. It's okay to step away if you have to. If you can't do something, it's hard. But grind culture is ugly and it can really destroy, you can lead to burnout. So manage your time as best you can, basically, is my answer.
So for your fiction work, what comes first for you? The characters, the setting, or the plot? I know you mentioned you were a pantser. So how does that process work?
It is definitely the characters. It's definitely the characters. For me, everything is about the characters and it all relies on the characters. They lead me 100%. So, the setting can be important. I am not a super descriptive person. I can appreciate it in other books, but I also get bored by it easily if it's too much. There isn't a direct point to it. I'm not going to like it too much. So for my own tastes, I'm definitely a more to the point writer with only the description that needs to be there. For fantasy, the setting is a lot more important and I put quite a lot more effort into it there. So it's going to depend on your genre. But with the characters, that's what comes to me first. Sometimes the world does. I'll give you an example. I actually start writing with almost nothing. It's the weirdest thing. I'll come up with this general vibe in my head for something. It's no more specific than that. So that's when I start putting it down on paper and it starts with the characters. That means because I'm a pantser, a lot of the time I write something that is way off base. It's like a totally different novel until I get toward about 2/3 through it. Then it really starts to become what it's going to become. From that point on, I start to really, really get the feel for what is really the point that I'm trying to get at. Who are these characters actually? It actually takes me through the first draft to get to that point. Then I go back and the second draft is rewriting it. I rewrite, and a lot of times I will rewrite even through the 2/3 where I knew what I was doing. That's the part that makes it hard for me to do a rapid release schedule. I've read so many people who say, if you're going to do rapid release, you need to be able to plot. Used to be a pantser, now I'm a plotter. So I know there are ways you can learn that. I stubbornly have not learned that yet. I have stuck with my pantsing ways, and this is, what I'm doing right now. And I love it. I really enjoy it. it. Even the uncertainty of it is fun. I don't know exactly how it's going to end. I don't know exactly how it's going to straighten itself out. And a lot of times while I'm writing, I'll write something that is so recognizable from a movie, it's not even funny. And I have to just leave it and just move on and just quickly write my way through it. And then I go back and I say, oh yeah, no, that's not at all what we were doing. I just needed to get through that point. That's how the characters lead me. They mess around with me a lot, though, I'll tell you. They really do. They mislead me a lot. And then by the end, finally, I'm like, okay, now I get you. Okay, here we go. And that's how it works for me.
So I would say I was a pantser all my writing life until I decided I was going to make this a career. And I thought, well, I kind of need a plan if I'm going to put out so many books by a certain time period. And I didn't set
Sure.
any hard dates. So I didn't make that mistake of setting hard dates, but I did have in my head, okay, by this year, I would like to have this between this many and this many books. And so I'm more of a plantser now. So I know how my books are going to start. I know how the series in the book is going to end. So I know each book and how it's going to end and how the whole series will end. But then in between, all of that's discovery writing. And I love that. And my characters mislead me all the time. So I'm like, really? Why would you choose that when we need to get to that point over there?
Right? It can change the whole end. It's crazy. I don't know what they're doing, but they know what they're doing, and it always works out well.
Yes. So I know you said that your publishing plan has changed now with Kindle Vella. So do you consider it a book on Kindle Vella, or is it because it's episodes? They still consider it a whole book on there, right?
You're writing a book through episodes. So, technically, like some people talk about it in terms of chapters, and they say like you're publishing a chapter a week. That is slightly off because not all chapters are that exciting, right? In a book, you can have chapters that really slow down and you're learning about people and stuff. With Kindle Vella, with any serialized writing, you need to keep it moving. Always. It needs to keep moving. We can't slow down too much, to a degree, obviously, but every chapter has to kind of start and end with a bang in a way. I saw someone describe it once as each episode is its own thriller novel in a way. And that's kind of true. You need to really have a good arc in each episode. The way that I sort of strategize it is to always have a crescendo. This is how I imagine every single episode that I write. So it starts with where we left off, and then we go, and it has to keep chugging along and waste no time, absolutely no time until we get to the end. So this is not the best platform for something like literary fiction, I would say, where there's a lot of time you need to spend time on metaphors and, like all kinds of broadening that might add up in the end, but not necessarily in the moment. Anything like that, not sure how well that would go over. So the pacing is super, super, super important when you're doing Vella. And I have noticed that the genres will be unsurprising to you that do the best is number one romance. I think we all knew that without me saying it. And also fantasy. Anything really fast paced is going to do really well.
So what are you working on next then for your Kindle Vella book that you're going to be putting out? And when will it come out? I think you did kind of mention that already, didn't you? You have an idea for later this year?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is you asked if it was a book, and I don't think I quite answered that. It is a book, but you can also, after a certain amount of time, I think it's something like 30 days, publish it as a regular full length novel on Amazon and paperback. So I can't recall the terms about going wide with it, but anyway, you can do that. So what's coming next is book 2 in Grimoire. So the first book was called Grimoire Society of Dark Acts. Don't have a title yet for the second book. This is a big struggle for me. I don't know why, but anyway, it has to do with the marketing mostly. So still trying to decide on the title, but it will be starting to release in July. I don't have a date yet because I need the cover from my cover designer. Kindle Vella covers are little circles, so they're not the same as having to have a huge cover. And FYI, I did publish the first one with, I wanted to spend as little money as possible so that if it failed totally, I wouldn't just lose that money. I bought a $1 Canva image, and that's my cover for the first one. And it was fine. Now for the second one, I would like a designed one, and we'll see if that even changes. It's going to start coming out in July, depending on when I have my cover ready. I will definitely have 6 episodes in the bag. It's going to be weekly. This is a series that I don't know how long it's going to go on. I'm building a world that I really want to be so expansive that it can just keep going. I'm really enjoying it, and it seems like my readers are enjoying it, and new readers are coming in as well. So this seems to be a good direction for me. So look for it in July for sure.
So that's great. So when this episode airs, it will hopefully already be out and have several episodes already going.
Yeah, we'll be way into it by then. That'll be perfect.
Well, you've answered all of our questions, but before we wrap up, can you tell our listeners where they can find you and purchase your books?
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. You had awesome questions. I really enjoyed talking to all of you. This is fabulous. So, you can find me at my website, christystratus.com, and you can buy my books directly from there. As you know, you probably know already, you'll get them gift wrapped, and they're going to be a whole experience for you. Signed, I include a card, the whole deal. So, it's a lot of fun. And then you can also find them, of course, on Amazon and I Am Wide. You can find them on Kobo. You can find them Barnes and Noble, all kinds of places. Apple, iBooks, pretty much anywhere you can find them. And you can find me if you're interested in some exclusive stuff, if you want to hear some really cool Victorian research types of stuff, if you want to see where my ideas are coming from, if you want to have first access to all of the Grimoire episodes, you can join my Patreon, which is patreon.com/ChristyStratus. And otherwise, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I have a Pinterest board specifically for Grimoire, and Facebook. I'm in a lot of platforms, but not TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. I won't be joining TikTok anytime soon. So please join me elsewhere. It's always just under my name. And I definitely hope to see you there. Thank you so much again.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I was especially grateful to learn that you were trying Kindle Vella out and that you had tried it and got some results on it, because that's where I'm looking for next. So I was surprised and happy when you said, hey, I'm on Kindle Vella.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely worth a try, especially if your genre works for it.
And I write fantasy, so hopefully that will work.
Yeah.
So thank you so much to our listeners and our viewers today. October 15th, we'll have science fiction and fantasy author Rod Van Blake, and that will be it for today.